So this afternoon we'll gather this morning presenters in a roundtable which will be moderated by Dr. Elspeth Brown, who I want to introduce in a few words. Elspeth is a professor of history at the University of Toronto, Mississauga, where she teaches queer and trans history, the history of US capitalism, oral history, and the history and theory of photography. She is a faculty director of the Critical Digital Humanities Initiative, as well as Associate VP Research at University of Toronto, Mississauga. Elspeth is also the author of the well-known book Works, A Queer History of Modeling, published at Duke in 2019, and The Corporate High, Photography and the Rationalization of American Commercial Culture, 1884-1929, published by Johns Hopkins University Press in 2005. She's the co-editor of Feeling Photography, with Tifu, published in 2014, and Queering Photography, a special issue of Photography in Culture, published in 2014. And Elspeth is also an active volunteer and co-president of the board of the Archives, Canada Lesbian and Gay Archives, the world's largest LGBTQ+ community archive. So please join me in welcoming the morning presenters Chantal Wilson, Daniel Foliard, Lauren Tilton, Nicola Carboni, and Elspeth Brown.
Thank you, Terry. Let me just see. Okay, everyone can hear me all right? Okay. So I thought what I would do is just say a few comments maybe to kind of get us started, and then pose a few questions to our fabulous panelists who gave these wonderful papers this morning as a way to get the conversation started, and then to invite people in the audience to ask questions as well that perhaps link some of the presentations together and enable us to kind of address some of the larger questions that underwrite a lot of what we were hearing this morning. So that is sort of my plan. I wanted to say it was a tremendous pleasure to hear all four of the presentations today. I feel like I learned a huge amount from both the technical, but also the larger epistemological and historical questions as well. I feel that we have a lot to work with, starting with Chantal's presentation, who helped us look at how AI can increase cataloging efficiencies in the context of a very specific collection. And she showed us in very generative ways how this work can help solve particular challenges, like, for example, the speed of digitizing. I mean, the incredible amount of work, how you were able to accomplish it so quickly, and how, of course, that raises other challenges around basically the labor of dealing with the cataloging and the cleaning up of data, et cetera. And you had mentioned the lack of a CMS for TMU. I got to say 2 acronyms right in a row. I really love that. So perhaps that can, because there's so much technical needs around some of these systems. And Danielle Foliard for the high vision emphasizes, really, I loved how you emphasized both the importance of close reading, which is close to many of our hearts, those of us especially who are interested in the historical work that we're doing, but also asking us to think about the infrastructure of photography through what Lauren has called, in another context, distant viewing. And Danielle did that through having us look at more closely at the Forbin collection when he's looking at questions of messy data, retouching, and metadata to ask historical questions about the circulation of images, about propaganda, about censorship, and really helping us see the connections between what this large-scale project can do to kind of reframe and historical questions and allow us to ask new historical questions, which was really great. In fact, I would have to say all of the presentations were so fruitful in really kind of moving us away from what feels like a prior moment within looking at, let's just say, digital humanities writ large, a prior moment of like, see all these cool things that, you know, this technology can do, which sometimes is dismissed as boys and their toys within the digital humanities scholarship anyway. So it felt to me very much like the presentations were really asking us to think critically about the historical questions that motivate so much of our research, while at the same time showcasing some of the very specific technological pieces that enable these new questions to be posed. So Lauren, her presentation on access and discovery of documentary images in collaboration with the Library of Congress also did this very brilliantly. One of the projects focusing on the Bain collection, and I love the connection across the projects. And here using AI to read, was it 16,000 images and generate descriptions? Or no, that, I guess the 16,000 images would have been Documerica, right? Yeah, the Documerica project, which I didn't mention to you, is close to my heart because one of my former PhD students wrote a chapter of his dissertation on Documerica. And I was like, what? I never heard of Documerica. Well, and I learned a little more, but now I see there's so much more potential. But anyway, showing how you can use AI in collaboration with SIGLIP to create this really robust descriptive power for the images, and how those two pieces can work together was really interesting, generating a lot of questions for me. And Nicola Carboni's work on the Visual Contagion project, wow, what an incredible project, focusing on the illustrated press between 1880 and 1990, nearly 20,000 periodicals, 15 million images. I mean, I know this is a project that many here know about, and it's been ongoing, but it really was spectacular to see it on display with your presentation. And I really loved your examples of automobility, early automobility, and the avant-garde journals, and helping us to really showcase the possibilities for historical research. And I also loved your how that you brought in some of the student research that's coming out of that project as well on corsets and patterns. So I think there are lots of themes that I think the projects together bring to the fore. Some of them have already come out in terms of the questions after each of the presentations. As I mentioned before, I think they're all very persuasive around the kinds of historical questions that this technology and these kinds of projects can allow us to ask, new kinds of questions that this data makes possible, this technology has made possible. So I'm just gonna, I have a bunch of questions. I'll just ask one and ask folks to weigh in. And many of you, perhaps all of you, have been involved with more than one project. And so feel free to answer it in any way that you want with reference to particular projects you've been involved with. But I think I'll start with this one question about the challenges around open access, because as you know, this open access has been tempered more recently by concerns about sensitive material. I know, Danielle, you've written about this, whether it's, for example, violence, racism, in my world, more transphobia, but questions of privacy, of course, are really central here. Thinking about questions of the viewer. What if this material gets in the quote-unquote wrong hands, which we're seeing this happen right now south of the border. Questions around data sovereignty. You know, we're here in Canada, this question has been really at the forefront of, in particular, Indigenous data sovereignty. So these are questions of tensions between open access and, let's say, privacy and sovereignty that take place in relationship to both the image, the content of the image, but also certainly in relationship to the metadata as well. So I'm wondering if you were able to kind of comment on how the projects that you're working in or with are navigating these conflicting demands relating to open access. And I realize that question is also related to public versus private, and so you could perhaps address those questions as well. Mark had said, go.
Maybe I can start. Because the previous project, which was a smaller one, was actually about digitizing and making available a lot of photos from colonial wars in the late 19th century, early 20th century. So we had a lot of thought put into how do we recirculate. There was a political argument to say we need to make these images available. Didn't seem that obvious 2-3 years ago. For concerns you're raising, issues that are obvious in terms of portrait communities being subjected to racist violence or colonial violence. But I must admit that as time goes by, I've got less and less issues with this, in the sense that just last week in France, a famous journalist called Apatide was just kicked out of a radio channel for having compared massacres in Algeria during the conquest of Algeria with massacres committed by the German army in 1944-1945 France. And in that European context, I think it becomes almost vital that some of the darkest aspects of that history are out in the open. So for that material in particular, obviously it doesn't mean that you're going to do it in a straightforward way or without thinking about how that works. So we put in place a system of trigger warning. People can choose or not to look at the images. We try as much as we can to negotiate the discourses and the metadata in a collaborative environment, but even that is quite difficult, right? If you think about how, in an Algerian context, for instance, right now, today, you would negotiate some kind of polyphonic discussion on the images, it's extremely hard, right? The Algerian government is blocking access to its own archives. So there's the intent of trying to negotiate a commons, and that's direction we should be headed to. And the complexity of today's world, well, say you're working, we were just discussing the Cultural Revolution in China, which is completely erased from the visual archive in China. There's no discussion about this. G doesn't want to talk about the Cultural Revolution for personal and cultural reasons. Who do you talk to if you stop working on this, right? What kind of negotiations can you have? So we live in that it's very difficult, right? And I don't think we should retreat from trying to address the most, that's just me, really, because I mean, my last book was really about ultra-violent colonial photography, and I decided to show a lot of that, and the circulation of the images from the previous project is there. Oh, I'm sorry, I'm talking too much, maybe. But with the four-man collection, I think what we want to do is also so that racist language of the late 19th century, early 20th century is there in the metadata, right? So that there are ways to, there's no debiasing per se, unbiasing. So there's no purity in the archive. It's not a horizon. The archive is going to be corrupted, whatever you do, right? Where maybe automatization can help is to make sure you've got more polyphony in the metadata, in the readings of the images, that it's easier to connect different voices and different readings to these images. But I think all the layers should be there for the taking. So there's a program in Europeana I was mentioning called Debias, with a sort of automatic tagging of sensitive words, where hyperlinks are automatically created to make sure racist vocabulary, transphobic vocabulary will immediately be visible on the page and connected to a critical explanation. So I think that's one of the ways, probably. But that's a very broad statement. Obviously, you want to protect kids and teenagers. So it really needs to be thought well in terms of ergonomy on the web, how to manage the things.
I don't know if there is any order.
No, whoever would like to jump in.
Go, then I'll go. Okay. One thing, like just thinking about the example of Algeria that come out in the project is quite telling. So the problem of assessing something, specifically when we are trying to do a global study, is that we only can tell the story from the point of view that we have access to. And in the case of Algeria, the source that we have access to are more or less the one that are in the BNF. So the one that have been published during a specific period of French history. So what kind of image are we telling the story from, of? We try to find other sources, but sincerely, there is some problem in assessing, first of all, problem that the source do not exist in digital format. And the problem that the question that we're supposed to ask: should we tell the story? How can we, in an application, somehow in a digital narrative, can make clear that what we are seeing is a perspective, and is not just purely, what we think happened. Is what we think happened given the source that we have, and the source that we have one clear perspective. And well, we clearly didn't because it was not within we couldn't do everything. But one of the things I want to build on is actually try to find a way to see the story and how, for example, we see a French regard on Vietnam instead of a local regard on Vietnam, or a French regard on Algeria. And because I don't see any other way to tell the story, or we don't, or we have to find some kind of compromise there that allow us to show the invisible.
Mm-hmm, mm-hmm. Maybe I'll jump in from a slightly different angle when I think about open access and system materials. So my journey into open materials and journey as well, shaped by my time before in graduate school. For graduate school, when I worked in journalism, and then when I worked at the National World War II Museum in the US, where I saw the power of open access, open source information, and saw on the front ends how journalism and then a museum were grappling with those pieces. So when I went to graduate school, I was really committed to digital public projects because that felt to me like a way that we expanded what we did, and I was really informed by training in the public humanities and ethnography that helped me think through the image, not just photo history, but ethnographic models and the challenges that anthropology and ethnography have had to think through the interpersonal ways in which we engage are shaped, and that has shaped how I think about digital worlds as well. That when we send these bytes of data to each other, they are a point of contact, they're a point of touch, and those ideas of the care work that I think some of the most cutting edge ethnographers think about informs how I think about that, even if it's digital. And so you saw today some really open source stuff we did, but I think I think not everything should be open access for sure. I'm inspired by projects like the Colored Conventions, which is Gabrielle Foreman's project, as well as Chicana por mi Raza, which is about activists, Latino and Latina activists in the 70s, where these digital archives and collections, they're textual based mostly, but they have walls of entry. You, in order to work with Colored Conventions data, you need to agree to their ethics boundary. If you want to access Chicana por mi Raza, you have to actually ask for access and talk to the community that has built that collection. And agree to their terms of engagement. And I think those are other models for thinking about, and indigenous models are obviously a big part of this as well. So, and I'll just add that we've done work also in the back end of projects. So for example, we built an entire digital project for Ukrainian, called the Ukrainian War Archive, where we worked with a community of documentary photographers from the Ukraine who are documenting the atrocities in life after the amid Russia's hostile war on the country. Those are not photographs for us to share. That's not our story to tell. That's within the community of the photographers and the photojournalists. Their team manages that. We just used our skill set to support them. That's not our data to make available. That's on their terms. And even though, and it's not my project to go around showing anything about, actually, it's on their terms. And so that's something I think about too with open access, that each project has a different element, and that those photographers in that community has a story to tell on their terms. But if we can put our technology, if we can put what we know how to do to provide them the access and potentially open access they want, that's has value.
And maybe I can just add something from a collections management standpoint, is that for a lot of like collections managers or archivists, open access literally means access to see the original objects in the collections that they're stored in. So it's about getting people in the door to see the physical thing, and the digital application is just one entry point into it, right? So a lot of collections in Canada are built on this idea of cultural property. It's a complicated tax situation where taxpayers are supporting a program that gives tax credits to people, and these things are built, but they're in theory owned by the public. And so collections are intended to provide access to the public, right? So it's part of that access is almost built into the kind of concept of acquisitions. And so doing whatever we can to provide access to the physical object is also still to be maintained in all of these other conversations.
Does that migrate to the digital asset that gets produced from the original, or no? Yeah?
I think so. I think it's just about having the infrastructure to support that access.
Yeah. Thank you.
Yeah.
Okay, I have another question. Did you want to jump in and say what
I
other
want
thing?
to actually to ask something, because we talk about access, and access is a very big word. Are we talking about just seeing the object in digital form, or are we talking also about redistributing, changing the context, or just merely analyze it? Because, for example, the Swiss legislation allow for the analysis of the object. So what we did would not be possible in another country, because Switzerland allow you to gather whatever you want, you analyze them, but you cannot redistribute. So you can see them, you can do some research about, but you cannot redistribute. And I think that if you believe, I would like to ask if you believe that there will be different policies on this different aspect of just pure access.
I think it raises a great question, which is about copyright, basically, and how the copyright laws, which of course vary from country to country, really kind of shift what's possible in terms of the various projects. And so I'm wondering if we could pose that as a sort of follow-up question about how each of the projects have navigated some of the challenges of copyright or not. I'm sure you probably have all had to deal with it one way or another. Some are obviously, already open access to begin with, but.
You want me to start? I think I mentioned this a little bit in one of the questions after the talk, but we have, as an educational institution, we can kind of promote our collection kind of internally. Most of our collections, the copyright is held by the original creator, which retain their copyright rights, and then we have to kind of either get a license to promote it or to use it or to provide public access to it in a digital format where we're reproducing it. And that goes for any time we exhibit it or market it or any of those things. So we are constantly trying to chase licenses. When we're talking about big global masses of information like the New York Times collection or the Black Star collection, we can publish what we have online because it's a representative of our collection. It's a catalog per se of our collection. And then there just becomes limitations on how big the file can be that's available online. That's how we are kind of tackling it on a case-by-case basis. How that translates into somebody then being able to take that image and plop it into Gemini or ChatGPT is yet to be adjudicated, I guess.
But coming.
In our case, the time span is really late 19th century, early 20th century. It's at a distance.
Yeah.
And my reflection on showing is also connected to this, right? So obviously I wouldn't work on much more recent images the same way. But part of our sampling, most of the collections we're working with are already in the public domain in France, right? So the institutions own the right to deal with the images, unless we work very well and we start identifying some photos in the collection. I think there's a Lewis Hine. It's not anymore, it's not protected by copyright anywhere, but the work we do might attribute authorship to photos that are not being cataloged under any name so far. But so it's obvious that's a huge question in the training data sets as well, right? That still has to be settled, okay? The name machine learning is really used by the GAFAM to say that's learning, so we're not stealing anything, we're just learning from a massive theft of that data. So that's something that it's still in the works, legally speaking, literally, and that needs to be clarified. We discussed that with Julien before and with the BNF people. Millions of euros of French public money has been put into digitizing stuff, translating sometimes. I think DeepL literally trained on European Union translations for years. So there's a sort of contradiction in seeing these companies owned by people like Elon Musk telling that taxes and public money and sucks, and training on expert data that has been done by archivists paid for by public money.
Yeah.
And there's a form of naivety in Europe, at least, in making that data that open source. With that, I'm not talking about copyright, but maybe a protection against these uses will be necessary. It's above my pay grade, but definitely there's some legal discussion to be had in how that extractivism works. So we need to be very careful in our work, because there might be a tendency sometimes to say, oh, that data is interesting, we would like to train something on it. And you realize that, well, the access is limited, and so we need to be very coherent with the way we work in terms of creating the data sets.
Yeah, I mean, yeah, second on the care that we do that. I'll note that, oh, sorry, thanks. One of the things I was thinking about too with the copyright, so the US is one of the most copyright protective countries. We love our copyright because we love capitalism. And, sorry, did I say that part out loud? Oh, okay, sorry. It's one word for it. And we've obviously have this ecosystem of for-profit companies from ProQuest to Springer to that are gobbling up everything and digitizing it and then making it accessible, but for great cost. And they're getting copyright. They're getting copyright by paying people for it. So it's created this incredibly wild financial system in the U.S. But and then I think this is. But I do think that the copyright conditions in the U.S. are one reason why events like this are really important. Thanks to Thierry and everyone for organizing, because High Vision, pictorIA, Julian, Daniel, everybody, because I think that one way to navigate this copyright ecosystem is to make international partnerships that allow people to do work in different spaces, that allow you to do the research you want based on the limits of each place and each spot, because that gives you the affordances of working around copyright. Sometimes copyright's a really good reason, but from my point of view, in my country, or maybe country, that's a really big issue. So, and it's too much. And I'll just say a second part, because I had this really great conversation last night at dinner with Emily Pugh, who's going to speak tomorrow from Getty, as well as Frances Cullen, who's going to be speaking tomorrow as well. And we had this really fascinating conversation about that private and public are being shifted right now, particularly in the U.S. context. That as the public gets eroded, there is no public access is switching. So what we've been doing hastily is downloading every image we can from the FSA, all of Documerica, anything we want to work from Library of Congress or National Archives, we've been downloading as fast as possible to stick on servers. And there's all these data repatriation moments from public institutions, literally what's supposed to be the public. Mm-hmm. And so now we're having this moment, and Emily was making a great point, is that we're in this weird moment where maybe privates are becoming like the new public in the US. And that is a really bizarre, problematic space to be in. And I don't know quite what to do with that yet. And I hope it doesn't quite get to that, but I thought that was a new way of thinking about public and private that's shifting around these data questions right now. So that we're seeing this in transition. I mean, at least in the US context. And I want to give Emily credit for really helping think through that last night. It's a really interesting question.
Yeah, downloading it to Amazon Cloud, maybe, you know, this is the problem. Like, where does it go, right? So-
Yeah.
Actually, this raises a great point. Okay, I wanted to mention, of course, that that copyright also, for our project, we mentioned until 1990, we don't have that many pictures after 1950. It's completely gutted. But some of, I think it's more interesting to reflect on this switch, because it's not happening only in US.
Yeah.
And I think it's part of a bigger movement that we saw for a few years. We already saw if we are in a research center and they try to push us to become entrepreneur, but we start to see it also in the public institution, notably the BNF, as some images and some paper which are in open access with a peculiar license, but they are available. But they start to put some of this text in a side project that they create where you need to pay to actually access them. And this is somehow these are made and proposed with the public money. And this, I don't know if it's about the funding. I don't know if it's because they are pushing to find a new way to gain money out of public resource. But somehow, in the US, as usual, things are bigger, things are more extreme. But it's also, it's also a European problem. It's I don't know any other country, but definitely that's the direction we are taking, which is a big issue.
I just want to maybe take this moment to plug Creative Commons as a tool for heritage institutions or any maker that can use that tool as a way to kind of segment the understanding of copyright. A lot of creators don't necessarily want to charge for all uses that you might have. What this tool does is it gives you different licensing options, all the wording for all the different licenses and the different uses that people can use, from educational to derivatives to modifications to all sorts of things. And it gives users a really clear understanding of copyright in their area and a way to like take that information and make their material available, no matter what kind of thing it is. So if you don't know about that, it's one to look out for.
Great plug. Absolutely important. So, okay, I have a question that I'm always interested in personally, and so I'm just going to ask it. And it has to do with collaborative research, because those of us who are in the humanities usually do not grow up in collaborative research environments. You know, we're like individual archive rats or what have you. We go off and we do our thing, and, you know, we're kind of introverts by nature. That's why we became the scholars that we are. But the work that you are all doing and that this whole area is about collaboration. And so I would love it if you would be willing to kind of pull the curtain back a little bit to kind of get into some of the nitty-gritty details about how the collaborations work. And I mean, there are lots of different ways you can answer that, but some of the questions I might be interested in include, for example, how is the project run? Is it hierarchical? Is it collective-based? Is it collaborative? And here I'm really influenced by some of the work that's been happening. Some of you in Canada might know Max Libron's lab, which is basically a kind of environmental and biological sciences, but a really radical Indigenous-led lab that has been kind of rethinking what collaboration looks like. Questions like, for example, how do you figure out who's going to write the article? And what's the author order? Like, he has a whole video on just that one thing, which is really amazing. I recommend. This is the kind of micro details of kind of the ethics of collaborative working. And I don't think there's a right or wrong way to do this. I'm not trying to say, but I do think it is a problem. I mean, some places have like these super elaborate, very interesting, cool like lab manuals that are living documents that, you know, go on for pages and pages and pages. It reminds me of 1970s lesbian processing, but whatever, I'm not going to say that. Anyway, so there are lots of ways in which people, and some are just like totally hierarchical. I got the money, shut up, do your job. If you don't do it, you're fired. I remember asking some of my colleagues in the research office who are all scientists, and they had never really met a humanist before, but they're like chemists and physicists. I'm like, So what do you do when, like, the graduate student you've hired to do X project in your collaborative research doesn't do the work and they don't show up? And they just looked at me like I was insane. They're like, well, you fire them, obviously. And first of all, it seemed so strange to them that the question was even posed, that, like, what? Somebody doesn't actually do their job? I thought it was kind of strange. But we've all had that situation, right? So I'm just wondering about how the collaboration works and what are the ethics of it from your perspective, and how do you navigate differentials around power and positionality that, of course, exist in any collaborative environment. And I'm also super interested in how you've reached to meet folks who are doing research research specialization is different from your own. Like if you're a humanist that doesn't really know anything at all about computer vision, how you approach that computer vision person to work with you on a project that wouldn't bore that person to tears, but might be interesting to them, since you might be a beginner on that score. Lots of questions bundled in. You're welcome to start anywhere you want. And also, I want to acknowledge, of course, that there's also going to be differences around faculty versus staff, staff versus other staff, public versus private, right? Because there are lots of ways in which everyone, regardless of how you're situated, you're going to be navigating these tensions.
Maybe I can start, because the way I jumped into another territory. So I got out of a long project working on my own on photography, and I was bored to death with myself. I really said, I need to work with other people. So part of the dynamics of doing these projects was really to really move into a lab environment, which is a culture that is hard to develop in France in the humanities, right? So lab-based actual collective work with more than 2 or 3 colleagues working on the same topic. And what I found is the culture of actual very democratic culture of lab work in the AI. It's maybe different in the US, but we are all boys representing the project, but all the AI specialists are women. So it's a weird combination in the sense that it's a massively inclusive environment on the technical side, and that brought us to follow their guidelines, basically, and to work in a way where Isabelle Bloch at Lipsys is working in a very inclusive environment, in a way where our interns are publishing with us. When they do the actual groundwork, they are the first authors. The next article we're going to publish is the first author is one of the interns. So we make sure that, and we use 2, right? So you know that in French you've got 2. It's very hierarchical. So normally younger people should say vous, and we don't talking like this. So it's important. It's actually very important in terms of how to create an environment where everybody feels comfortable talking about scientific stuff. And it's also the fact, I think, that project in particular moves people, the AI specialists, a bit away from what they are usually doing, that is working on X-rays, or it has a political dimension to work on something that is potentially useless right now in AI. So the 3 interns we have, I'm not going to get into their intimacies, but are politically, personally motivated to do something else with the kind of, and they are great students, they are brilliant students. So that creates an environment where, by following the guidelines of existing labs that are really well organized in terms of collective work, I'm learning a lot, really. It's changing the way I'm thinking about how to manage projects. So I'm just the guy taking care of paperwork, and I'm the PI, but I'm just organizing stuff. And it's a very open discussion, I hope.
Well, I can jump in. Okay, there is a lot to talk here. It's an enormous topic, but let me just start with the collaboration. The first answer that popped up into my mind when I thought about when you were actually mentioning was slowly and painful. It's horrible to say, but so I made my PhD together with in this collaborative project together with engineers, for example. And when we had to write together, it was struggling. We had a paper where there are like 5 engineers, an archaeologist, a philosopher, and would be me, an information scientist. Finding the right language was something that took us days, because every word could be, this is too complicated, and there would be, oh, this is like, it means something else, something else in another domain. So finding a common ground sometimes can be painful. It's extremely enriching. I'm not saying, I mean, I love collaborating with people, but there is a dark side of that you need to put the effort of it. But it's also the fact that we were forced to it in a way or another, I think is one of the key answer. What Europe did somehow with this project and this funding is forcing people between different disciplines to collaborate. Say, we give you funding, but who's coming in? Are there people from cultural sector and not just merely from academia? Are there people that are actually from a small business? We need to mix people. And so forcing that somehow, in a very European sense, central authority, enforcing some pattern, it worked. It worked somehow, and that based on that, it allowed us to collaborate. Because there is a need, and also there is also not just purely a need, there is an interest. When I talk with computer scientists and I bring them like example of images, they look at that and say, oh, that's outside my scheme. I like that. I like a challenge. And in culture, we have tons of challenging things, and that's the great thing about it. The problem is indeed finding the avenue of collaboration. Because at the end, how can we get the money for it in order to be able to collaborate together? Europe has given like a very faulty avenue for it, but indeed is one. And I think that's one model to continue taking and to maybe proceed with.
I just wanted to say I was once working on an article with 2, I think they were postdocs, or maybe they were graduate students, on the pitfalls of collaboration. Okay, during the process of writing this, they both quit, which I thought was hysterical, because at a certain point, they're like, I don't need this stupid publication, because they had gotten jobs, which was really great. I'm like, wait a minute, I didn't know you could quit. It was really kind of instructive to me. I should quit more projects, but anyway. But before they quit, before we wrote we didn't write anything eventually, but we did do this fantastic survey, and we had like 80 responses about collaboration in digital humanities. That's what the focus was, and almost everybody said that sort of what you're suggesting, which was the huge amounts of challenges working across disciplines, across fields, and it's difficult work, right? And sometimes it can take longer than one expects. But they all talked about the interpersonal challenges as well, and it sort of raised the question for me that why these research teams don't have like a social worker or a counselor as part of the research team. It seems so obvious because everyone was just naming this as a problem. And of course it's a problem. I mean, we're people after all, right? And so, I mean, I thought, wait a minute, there are people who are skilled in how to navigate these interpersonal tensions. Shouldn't they be part of the research team? Anyway, just a thought there for your next grant if you're looking for solutions. But Lauren, did you want to jump in on this?
Because the trauma of graduate school already set you up. What are you talking about? Just kidding. I had a great graduate school experience and a wonderful advisor who...
Same one.
Yeah, same one. So that's why I'm being real the joke. Yeah, this is great. So I was about to lose it in grad school in my first semester because for those of you who know me, I'm a huge extrovert. And I was about to lose it. I was like, if I don't do collaborative work, I'm gonna implode. I'm just I've got to be with people. I've got to think out loud. I've got to talk. I've got to engage. And I'm under the weather today, so you're getting the tamer version of this assignment. Okay, I'm from New Orleans. It's let's go all the time. Okay, can't take that out of me. So I was just I got to be with people. This solitary academic is gonna be the end of me. So in front of me for collaboration, like saved me in graduate school. It's like what got me through it. And that is where I learned a lot about how to work with other groups and to engage. And through tried and hard, so part of the things I learned the hard way during collaboration was, since I was working with people in data science, well, now what we call data science, at the time would have been statistics and computer science. I learned a lot about how I had to meet people halfway. And so I taught myself LaTeX, which is the language that's actually coding, and people in CS and data science and publishing want to write in that instead. I started to teach myself how to code, because how was I going to talk to them if I didn't know how to use R and do the data analysis? And so I reoriented my graduate education a bit, because I felt like that was the only way I was going to be able to be a true collaborator. What that also meant was when I got my faculty job, we had to think about how we were going to publish. And I made a decision early on that I was not going to write a single author book. I could do it. I wrote a whole dissertation about something other than photogrammer. I had a whole project. UNC Press was interested in it, from 70s filmmaking. It's like a path I didn't take, right? And we started to negotiate, because other people were on tenure tracks, other people were in libraries and museums. We laid out how we were going to publish. So we were going to go to CS proceedings. We were going to apply for short articles in different journals. We talked about how we were going to turn the digital project into a publication, how we could take pieces of it all were people, and everything I wrote was co-authored, every single thing I published. And I had a moment at my third year review where my dean said to me, I really think you need the single author book. And I said, I'm not going to be a part of the problem in higher ed, where I create these standards, where you do all this digital work, you get the NEH grant, you get all of this, and write the book. I don't want to be a part of this labor problem. And he looked at me and he said, well, I really think it's a good idea. And I said, why? And I was like, why? Like, because that's kind of my style. Yeah, no one wants to be in administration. I just talk back. And so and he's like, okay, well, you know, your colleagues are doing this. They're doing it all. And I said, and do you really think that's a good idea? And he goes, well, that's the standard. And I said, according to whom? And he goes, well, they're doing it at R1s. And I go, well, I don't work at a Research 1. We're a different model. Do you want to be a part of the future, or do you want to be a part of the past? And I'm not kidding, sorry. I was like turf war in the middle. And he looked at me and he said, put it in writing. And I went up for tenure on no digital, all digital. I didn't say I have a single monograph book. I did all of it through there to model it. Because if no one models it, then we create this wild labor conditions. We don't allow for everything to be multi-authored. So I made a decision to go at it early on to do that. Luckily, I kind of knew the dean a little bit of context. This wasn't the first time we had kind of gotten into it, so we had kind of a little bit of a rapport. But I just think sometimes those are important elements of the equation. But those are lessons learned of lots of mistakes I made along the way. We can talk about mistakes if you want. There's a million of those. Yeah.
It's kind of interesting hearing your perspectives on this from an academic context, because from a museum context, and I'm looking over here, we do very little non-collaboratively. I think minus writing our own emails, and let me tell you, even that is collaborative sometimes. Yeah. From a cataloging perspective, in terms of like creating information that's accessible, it goes through several iterations of edits. It goes through several different eyes. We have conversations about it if there's a specific focus. There's been times where 3 people from the same institution have used the same photograph and it has a different caption every time. Right? And so there's different uses and different types of information required for different purposes. In exhibition, we might not include all the information in the metadata we have in a catalog that a researcher might want access to, and we might publish even less if we're trying to make it fit into an Instagram square. So I think from that perspective, we are very collaborative in that way, but of course, that collaboration could sometimes come with hierarchical issues. I think we have to be transparent about understanding that, and so I think combating that and knowing that that exists and trying to combat that may it doesn't maybe provide a solution, but the awareness might help the collaboration process a little bit more.
Great, thanks, Chantal.
Maybe continue on the theme of collaboration. Another thing that popped up into my head is that is the limit of the international collaboration. Like right now, we are in a symposium organized in Canada. We are coming from all over the world, but I'm currently switching institution, and I'm going from the old to the new continent. And all my, well, from my old network is in Europe. So my possible collaboration for funding are with European colleagues. And yet, we do not have many instruments to collaborate across border. France and Switzerland have some because they both speak French. Maybe if you have in the same language group, there is US with UK. But, US and France, very little, if or maybe I'm not knowing them, but I search for it. So there seems to be some kind of limit to the collaboration that we can envision, maybe at least in academia, because I know that, for example, in the museum sector, there may be more initiative, more collaborative initiative under the umbrella of ICOM or many other. But when we are looking at a specific field, the collaboration is purely, we are interested in the same topic, but actually working together under the same umbrella fund, that's very, very, very limited. And I don't know if it's the experience of everyone else at this table too, or maybe just unlucky on this.
Well, you should come to Canada. In fact, because Canada has a lot of robust opportunities for collaborative research. Yeah. And I was just talking to Thierry about this earlier. So I'm telling him about, emphasizing, what SSHRC, which is Social Science and Humanities Research Council of Canada, has to offer. And now SSHRC has become part of Horizons Europe. So there's a lot of, there's a lot of possibilities. It's very different in the States in terms of how humanities research is funded. So that's why we Canadians need to be your best friends. I'm just saying.
Yeah.
You are.
Good, we already are. And notice how I said we Canadians. I won't mention the other country of which I am a citizen, but it is nearby. All right. So I have another question, and then maybe we can open it up to have questions from the audience as well. So since we are all here because we love photography. And all of this fantastic distant viewing work and this AI work is looking at images at scale. There probably comes to be a moment when you're like, you know what, I think I might just need to look at a photograph for a while, or maybe actually pick one up. And so I'm just curious about the place of close reading in your methodologies. Where does it enter, or if it enters into the work that you're doing, or if you haven't done it for a while, maybe you might miss it or not, or where it fits into your trajectory as a scholar and a collections management expert. That's assuming, of course, you'd like to look at the image, which I'm sure maybe some of them you don't want to, so do keep that in mind.
Overrated. Maybe I'll start that one. I think getting back to the photo is always really exciting, actually. So while we do a lot of work at scale, there's really those great moments where you get back to the individual image and maybe some of the insights from those models let you see the image differently, which that has been my case, where they help me see and they help me view in a way I hadn't initially or had come to understand. And so I think getting back to it is really always important. And in fact, almost with all of our projects, we always go to the archive itself, go to the National Archives, been through the files of the FSA with the paper that you pull out because to actually understand how they're digitized and how to work with them at scale is to understand how they were archived, is to understand how they were put in there in those materials. So we are always back to the image, because even when we want to do that distance, knowing the materiality, seeing the images in person, really is always helps us understand them. It's a push and pull back and forth for me. So, so this never leaves the actual image itself. After all, I joke, but I love photography more than anything. So it's like just to stare at one photo as a gift, actually. Feel sit in one room and look and really deeply look is a moment of contemplation and thought and engagement that so often we don't actually get to do.
There needs to be an hygiene there in terms of the more I work on digital photography, the more in my classes. I shouldn't do that, but I've got my own collection of pretty rare Orientalist collections, and I give them to the students. And I know they're gonna suffer, but I think it's important, the feeling, even the smell sometimes of an old album is absolutely necessary. And I also, with my students in master's degree, I bring them to a great artist in Paris called Melanie Jane Frey, and she has a wet collodion workshop. So we work on these PowerPoints, and at the end, the big prize is we're gonna spend 4 hours taking very slow photos, just looking at, it's more than materiality, it's literally feeling what collodion is. There's some arsenic in it, I think, and it's going back to this is absolutely essential, not just for our balance in our relation to photography. There's a brutality to digitization and screens all the time. And there's, in terms of writing and social impact, let's face it, there are very few books talking about photography at scale that are good reads. After all, I mean, people want to see exhibitions and look at photos for what they are. So there are excellent books on distant viewing. I'm not, but in terms of how we relate people to the past and through images, we need to be, and it's hard because we've got a lot of work and managing projects like this and doing different types of mediations it takes time, right? But I think it's very important to be able to, that's why this morning I was saying, one of the best, I love the project, but one of the best part is just that tiny exhibition to an extent where we will be able to show the photographs.
Yeah, I mean, this is the Image Center's standard operating procedure, is to go back to the object and provide access to the physical object for the things that you can't glean. And most of what we do is capturing that object in its many facets and forms and how it can be interpreted in different ways. So I think for us, always going back to the object is important, or at least we are a place to do it. Maybe it's not always the answer for everything, but we are a place to explore that avenue. Even if I harken back to my own individual research, like going back to even just like learning how to load a microfiche. Do people even do that anymore? And like in like a library and looking at original objects and trying to find them manually, not using AI to find where they were published, like actually having to like flip through the pages and find where it is. There's a difference in when you find the image that you're looking for published. It's a little bit different than seeing it all listed in a database. It's a bit of a different experience.
And in your case too, when you were digitizing all the images, someone, maybe not you yourself personally, was handling every time to put them down and pick them up. And so there's a sort of haptic dimension of the work that you do that's really central. That can get lost a little bit, of course, as we're describing a little bit. Did you want to jump in?
Yes, but coming from a different background, I may have a different answer. In the sense that, okay, first of all, I'm not going to give access to people to 15 million photograph. That would be kind of. But aside from that, no, what I'm more interested is coming back to the object through the digital. In the sense that, yes, of course, let's be face it, I don't like digital exhibition, I like real exhibition. But aside from that, what I find very interesting in respect to the object is how we can use the digital to try to find a way for seeing the object again. Because when we are touching, we have a materiality, and when we are touching a page, we know exactly the type of paper we are using in that page. When we smell some page, we know that that page has been done in 16th century or in 17th century, sorry. We can smell the licorice in some page. When you go to the archive in Florence, there are some floor that you just, it's amazing. If you are thinking about archaeological object, it's even better. So I see that. But what really interests me when I see that is how can I make someone understand that through the digital? How can I make someone comprehend the materiality and then be sensible to a digital object? And I don't have an answer yet, but I think it's a fantastic
so
avenue.
Utopian, I love it. What were you gonna say?
I was gonna say it's an interesting moment to ask this question because I'm thinking of like presentations where synthetic images were being created, or when Julianne was talking about the idea of, what's the term you were using? The new images are not CAPTA, they're generata. That's what it is, generata. Because like the new images being produced, the only materiality is the server. Like the server is the materiality now. And what a weird moment, like, to be thinking about materiality of images. They're literally, like, lights up. Like, what we see as the materiality are, like, servers doing this now, like, blinking. That is, like, it's cables that they're going over. Like, the materiality of the image is, like, totally shifted to, like, the literal infrastructure of our digital worlds. And I don't know, maybe someone else has written about that, but, yeah, to our phones. Emily's like, your phones. Like, this is an interesting moment about materiality. I don't know what to do with yet. Maybe people are much smarter know how to figure out that. But
Miriam
yeah.
Posner writing about this now?
She's doing supply chain.
Oh,
Yeah, it's a little different, like the supply chain software.
oh,
Yeah.
that was a good question.
But just to mention, an artist actually work on that and create sculpture of fiber optic, because the idea is that it's digital and that you can represent the digital is through fiber optic and light on it, and so you can see pulsating. The problem is I don't remember the name, but if you Google, you find it.
Yeah. Like Paglin we're gonna see Paglin tonight, a bunch of us, like he still wants to print it, which is super interesting. But the new work that MoMA just took on, which is the, what did MoMA just bought I was thinking about it earlier, so I wrote it down. Oh, sorry, MoMA, I was saying Paglin still wants to print it, who's giving the talk tonight. But unsupervised by Rafiq Anandal, which was just acquired by MoMA, which is a big image embedding of the archive. It's only digital, it's on a screen. Like the image is a screen. So it's interesting moment to think about these. Sorry, I got on a little,
It's good, and
opened
I
up a little.
appreciate your bringing in the art as well. That's great. All right, well, I think we might be out of time, if it's all right with our esteemed leaders over there, to open it up to questions from the audience. And so if folks have questions that you feel could perhaps bring a group of folks into conversation, some sort of macro level theme or concept or question that folks could speak to, then we would love to hear them. Yeah.
Sorry, this is not a question, just a comment and a response about the materiality of digital images. And I'll have to say that the Canadian media scholar Marshall McLuhan already wrote that in Understanding Media. And not so much digital image, but he said that electric light is just the content without the medium. The medium itself can just move. Right? So when you think about it, because all you're looking at is electric light. So, yeah, half a century ago.
I would quibble with that, but I think that's a good conversation to have. You literally have bits. You literally have software that has to move. It's not just medium as a mess. McLuhan has a lot. Anyway, I want to jump in, but if we could talk about it later. But if anyone wants to engage in that afterwards, beer, done, let's go. That would be really fun. Sorry.
Paul?
I'm sorry, I don't want to beat a dead horse on the materiality, but I think that also a lot of this is a romance, right? That we first of all have to define the object, because this debate's been going on forever. Is the negative the original? Is there any such thing as an original? Now with Born Digital, is there, like, do we romanticize a raw file? I've never seen anybody do it. We spent decades creating microfilm libraries that we now throw away without a second's thought. We have slide libraries that everybody went to school with, and those get thrown away without a second thought. So I think that I'm as romantic about an original photograph as anyone, but at the end of the day, I don't know that there's any crime being committed by digitizing. And I think it's, in my career, it's always been sort of amusing to watch us run around and try to adapt to it, you know. I remember registrars trying to put accession numbers on hard drives and zip drives back in the 1990s, you know, because that was the object that they were given, and they're supposed to put a number on it in order to track it. But at the end of the day, it's always, the carrier, the container always changes. And we're always, I think, striving toward greater mobilization of the image and the information. So.
Thank you for that. That was a really fun panel. So I just wanted to speak to a couple different things. I work on Chantal's team, so I'm the research archivist in the collection. So I can speak a little bit to the collab part that you were asking about. You know, I deal with the Bernie Sabat archive, and those negatives are seriously on their way out. Acetate, degrading, vinegar syndrome, all of it. And so the sort of theoretical underpinning of Laura's technical approach to those negatives that she presented on yesterday was really, you know, we're a tiny team, so we have to collaborate. Like, there's really no other way to do it. And I think the advantage we have of being so small and kind of working as close as we do is we also have buy-in. Like, we're really sort of committed to this projects that we work on. But Laura and I also agreed during that project, we'd had some professional development money, and we went together and presented a co-authored paper in her circle of people first, and then decided let's like shift it around a little maybe later and jump over into more of my circle of folks, just to sort of keep the ideas moving between disciplinary silos. So I thought that was like an interesting sort of feedback to what you were talking about. And then I'm also always thinking about like what is gain, what is lost, similar to what Paul just said, that it seems we just seem to be running around all this digitization stuff all the time. And what is gained and what is lost, I think, is just the choice of what are we trying to foreground, and these are all just tools. We're just adding tools to the basket all the time. For example, you know, the capture that Laura developed for those acetate negatives, they are really degrading, but what we don't know is they're like half an inch thick. Like, they are really bubbling and channeling, and they smell. Like, there's a haptic interaction with those negatives that is like Gael leaves the room when they're out, you know? It's really strong, and it has quite a like visceral reaction. So I just wanted to like bring some of that into the picture too, because it goes away when you see it on the screen as a flat image that just looks, you know, really hard to look at. And then, Elspeth, maybe you can speak to this a little bit. And everybody else too, the questions around language and the sort of elasticity around trying to expand language to describe a lot of these sort of digital images, it really resonates with me in terms of the research I've done in activist archives. They seem to have always been pushing the boundaries of descriptive language. Activist archives, counter archives, there's always seems to be a moving out of this quote unquote controlled vocabulary, and I think there's something to be said about what we can learn from like folks who've been at this forever. You know, and anyway, I think that's a really interesting sort of place that we can, you know, start to collaborate a little more. Yeah, that's all.
Maybe I could just respond around a reference to the Homosaurus project. I don't know if some of you might be familiar with this, which is a standardized controlled vocabulary having to do with gay things that I think came out in, I think it was based in Amsterdam for many years. And then it migrated to the US, and right now KJ Rawson, who founded the Digital Transgender Archive, is looking after it, and there's a team that includes Marika C4 and others, and really kind of updating it because there were some major problems. My students tried working with it to create metadata for an oral history project having to do with the Desh Pradesh, which is a South Asian queer visual arts festival that happened here, and could not find words to describe classic Indian dance, for example, outside of a discourse of basically exotic dance. And so there are major problems with it, but KJ has been, they've really changed it, and now they're doing a Spanish language edition, I believe. But of course, KJ is trans, he works at Northeastern, so he's trying to figure out where he could go and where the DTA could go, because it's on Amazon servers. And so it's unfortunately, it's kind of scary time to be doing anything having to do with LGBTQ stuff, especially trans stuff in the US that's digital, and that is related to universities or the public sphere. Actually, I just came back from Montreal a couple days ago. Was it Sunday? Because the Public History, National Council on Public History Conference was happening in Montreal. And from the US, it's a US-based conference. And these are folks who work for the National Park Service, Smithsonian, et cetera. You can only imagine. But anyway, yeah, thank you for that, Denise, appreciate it. But I see a hand, yep, great, thank you. Thanks, Gail. Yep, please.
So I first have one brief comment about the materiality, but I do look forward to the beer.
It's a theme, I love it.
So to me, this is a great example of why we need the 3 Ps, and none of those Ps are photograph. It is principles, policies, and processes. Right? We need principles to guide our actions, we need policies to encode those principles, and we need processes to enforce those policies. And by which we can then understand the use cases for why we talk about things in the way that we do, either materialistically or not. But my question, which is really a question, is that yesterday we had a lot of discussion around the challenges of using artificial intelligence to assign identity to individuals, be those individuals instances of objects or instances of people, within photographs and other artwork. Are there techniques, or be they technical or social, that we, big we, can think about and work together on to move forwards, getting from just classification of role or type through into being more confident about the teaching AI to be more confident about the identity of individuals in photographs?
I mean, to both your 3 Ps and to Charlene's point, I'm hopeful that these conversations happening in the different groups around standardized vocabulary, even though it is standardizing it, that work is being done, those conversations are being had by all these different organizations, whether they're geographical, institutional based, politically based, that if the people that are conscientious enough to incorporate those into their AI research and their language models, that we can incorporate those in a more inclusive way. That's a very, I guess, positive way to look at it. I don't know if it's possible. We'd like to hope it is. I don't know if anybody else has a response to that.
Yeah, and what about the question as well about identification and AI and photography, and where that's at right now?
I mean, personally, I would steer away from that stuff entirely, right? At least in terms of modern production of tags, and I don't see the point. I mean, what can be used are potentially sensitive captions created at the time of creation of the photos and that history, maybe. But I don't know what specific cues would we have to automate this. I don't really understand, I must say. That's really today's kind of interpretation by users. So why would you want to search for this? I mean, I get it, right? But personally, I don't think it's useful at all. The language models, the way they are trained, it's just horrible. So there's no way. What would you do? Create ground truth?
Yeah.
Material? I don't see how it could work. That part should be taken with close reading. I mean, that's typically what you want to do, right? That's another layer of ways of reading images that should be done entirely differently.
Well, it seems the technology then is right hand in hand with contemporary police issues and surveillance capitalism and incarceration. I mean, these are the same technologies. I'm not enough of a specialist in the area to know where the beginnings and ends and how they overlap, but it seems to be potentially that much closer to these surveillance concerns.
Yeah, that's just me. I saw some articles on faces and emotions.
Yeah.
That's so, I'm sorry, it's ridiculous, right? When you look at colonial photographs, some of them they're all full of domination, obviously, but sometimes you've got a local leader in front of the camera is not smiling. And so there was a great project based on Elizabeth Edwards' work in Nigeria, and they recirculated some of these images. And a local elder said, he's not smiling because that's a sort of position of power in terms of how the face is managed. So there's no way you can understand faces in an automated way. AI just creates this, or it's just in English, basically. I mean, what you're going to have is English-speaking vision of what a face means, right? Because the data is massively in English. The feelings are massively formulated in English. So yeah, again, that kind of avenue, I would steer away from that.
And that history you're describing of reading the face is so profoundly racialized because it comes right out of colonial racial science, right? So.
And it's, I mean, in lighter times, maybe you could, right now, reading the last paragraph, one of the paragraphs of the last executive order on the Smithsonian, which I think, sorry to say, the Nazis could have written that, right? When they deny the fact that biological construction is a cultural construction, it's by the book, 1930s vision of what racial construction is. So this is specifically not the time to play with these tools right now.
But also from taking aside all the concern for a second, even from a practical standpoint, let's say we want to develop something, which again, I underline, should not. But let's say that we want to do it. We have so many different cultural expressions across the world. And we have so many cultural expressions across one country, and country as small as Italy. And I can testify of that. It changed from region from north to south. So if we want a uniform and an horizontal model, will we be able to cover all of that? And if the answer is no, then the model is not going to be in any way useful. And therefore is an exercise in what? In spending computational power. I mean, at the end of the day, it's also that we can discuss. But even if we develop, we are just like projecting special cultural practice onto what we know is a classification of a large population. We will not fit within this cultural practice. So I would stay away from it.
And that kind of normalization it's not just tagging stuff. It's creating a reality of what a face should look like on the long term and how people should behave, right? In Italy, television Italian created a sort of baseline, and some of the accents are disappearing. In France, I lost my Toulouse accent in Paris. So my point is that kind of normalization it's not just about describing. It creates effects on how people will act after that or will take photos. So it's not just a neutral intervention.
Okay, I have a question, but also your thoughts are kind of related. My question was going to be, how do you all feel about community input in training the AI? And I would say I disagree with some of your thoughts just now, because I do think there is a use for being able to identify people, obviously not in racist or like using phrenology or pseudosciences. That's not the route. But for instance, there are some communities, Indigenous communities in Canada, that have been photographed through like governmental lenses. They don't even know where their histories exist and in what archives. And from some of my research, the people that I've talked to specifically in the Musqueam community have suggested that it would be extremely helpful if there were ways that they could know where their images are being held. And so I think, right now, at least with the collection here, sometimes there is a specific band, tribe, group, community, nation attached to the caption, the label, but many times there are just generalized kind of pan-Indigenous terms, and that special knowledge that, even myself as a researcher who has an interest in this, I don't have all that cultural knowledge, and I'm not sure that, the people like any of us potentially do. So having community input could be a really valuable way of kind of democratizing how we are projecting onto others. So I wonder how you might have kind of addressed that or think about that. Thanks.
I don't think it's in contradiction with what we say, in the sense it's too precious to be automated. basically, right? Because automation works for a certain amount of things, and for that, we should find the money and the time to do it correctly. I mean, I'm not saying that automation doesn't work, technically, but that's too important in these specific minority-related situations to just be treated like this.
Yeah, maybe just to add on to that, quickly, maybe to even go like one step further, like sometimes the frame of like community input still puts like the power and positionality still on the researcher, or the museum, or the institution. And that's why kind of earlier I mentioned, I think ethnography has a lot to share with us, and the histories of ethnography and some of the more recent work about what does it mean to give a full, be more where the power dynamic is disrupted in that negotiation of collaboration. And I think of actually a book that is old at this point, but actually still gives a lot, was Judith Butler's Giving an Account of Oneself. It's a really interesting, it's one of her lesser known books actually, but it's one that I think is a real basis for thinking through a more, like, what does it mean to be in real conversation with people? And I see that as like a basis theory that undergirds a lot of public humanities work actually. Mm-hmm. So I think doing this kind of work when in collaboration with the communities, or working on behalf of the community, of which I'm just the interlocutor, I'm just the one, like, can be a really powerful process of engaging. And I think there's a heuristic here that's maybe helpful to disconnect identity, identification, and to identify. AI is really good at identifying. It's very good at identification of people and certain objects, but identity offers a much more complex theorized ecosystem from sociology, cultural studies, and others that we can grapple with, and that if we want to engage with identity, it's important that those who are a part of that community in which that identity is the subject is a part of the equation. And I think that's often very careful, slow work that takes a lot of time. It doesn't happen overnight.
I just want to say thank you. Oh. Yes, 100% agree. There are like not so many projects in the digital domain that do take input somehow in the construction of the identity of the object. There are some, the Rijksmuseum, I believe it did at a certain point. Europeana World War I was another nice project, now defunct. But one instance where this was discussed, and I remember discussing with some museum where we wanted to use annotation of 3D model to gather a community and let them provide knowledge about the object or stories about the object. What I find extremely useful, this would help us understand and reframe it, is that a lot of museums that we were talking to at the time, some were extremely happy, but some were very, very careful about it. Say, this is not, this knowledge, where it comes from, where is the authority of the knowledge, what they are bringing here. I mean, they are bringing their story, what we should do with this. We prefer no. And there was instead like a rejection of it, which I think is very much telling of how much we consider the system of authority and the input within a community. So please, if you have digital project, do this.
Maybe just to close the loop a little bit on that, I think that the tension that we're seeing in these conversations is that people come to collections and they come to access research and they want to be guided by those identifiers. So if the identifiers aren't present, the lack of the identifiers becomes the focus. So I think the original impetus for maybe me bringing up the control vocabularies was that it's an entry point into accessing these collections in a way that's not accessible in any other way. So when researchers are coming to us and they say, I want to see all of these representations of these peoples or this practice or this terrible news event or whatever, we have to have the language to be able to tag or identify things. And we sometimes don't have the correct language to do that. So that's kind of where that comes from, that controlled vocabulary. The whole work that you're suggesting about having these really important conversations and determining what is the right information and where it's coming from is happening in that controlled vocabulary space. Yeah. And so if we can incorporate some of those in our understandings, we may have an easier time using some of these tools. I know it's yes, I hear you. I think it's an entry point. It's an entry point.
This conversation is making me think about the work of contemporary artists and activists who have been engaged with museums and archives over the last 30 years, you know, I don't know, from Fred Wilson's work forward. And there's been lots of very super interesting projects that involve either artists from the get-go, conceptualization of the project, or are artist-driven from the very beginning in relationship to archives. But I can't think of very many digital projects of the ones that, you know, the scale that we're talking about that are integrating artistic engagement with the work from the very beginning, you know, almost like an artist in residence in your Documerica project, for example. What would that look like? And I don't know if that work is happening, if people are conceptualizing their collaborative digital projects with that in mind, or whether or not that's an opportunity that might be on the horizon. And the reason why I mention it simply is because I think some of the important work that can happen is raising some of these issues for conversation and discussion, whereas sometimes they can get buried as people work on the 3 Ps, if you will, towards completion of a project or what have you. And it's almost like it's a kind of division of labor. It's an opportunity to raise questions in a different modality that could inform the research in other ways. So just something for those of you writing grants in the future. Yeah.
We did that.
I mean, you're speaking about inclusion, and principles of inclusive design actually engage with this. And, you know, they like to focus on a slogan, nothing about us without us. And this goes, you know, not only, this applies not only to people with disabilities who've actually have been considering AI for a long time, because they, you know, statistically, they are a group that is, you know, the least represented. And so the algorithm would never identify them. But it continues with other you know, racialized groups or members of LGBTQ communities and the intersections. So there actually have been a number of projects, including those that emphasize the principles of inclusive design and cooperative approaches to doing digital projects. I actually have a number of them written down, and so I'm happy to pass them on. But that's just something I wanted to throw in there.
Yeah, great, wonderful, thank you.
I think we have a.
Oh, sorry.
I just wanted to add to what she was saying. My dad's turning 90, and I had a picture of him as 25-year-old. And I'm retouching it, and I reached to a point where I say, why am I doing all this work? I'll let AI do the retouching. And he came back looking European. So I had was to go back from scratch and do it the old-fashioned way.
Yeah, absolutely. This is the biases that are built into the training data. Yeah, it's a great example. I think that we had a hand in the back, or did?
I think it was over here.
Oh, sorry, over here. Thank you, Gaia.
I also wanted to chime in here, thinking about this question of, I really liked, Lauren, how you distinguish between identification and identity. And it also made me think of how a lot of this work is premised and has been premised even pre-computation on, like, we're going to find everything it's possible to know about this thing and fill in all of the categories. And in this ironic way, the more AI is showing us that we're able to find out things we never thought we could. But I think it's also showing, like, how that's like maybe an impossible dream, and like, because not only ultimately will we never be able to know everything, even if we do, what it's so contextual, like what's meaningful in one, like for one collection might be harmful in another. So, and it also made me think of in the papers earlier, this idea of like in an interface showing messiness. And so it also makes me think of, could we show absence? Could we show uncertainty, but also, that we don't know these things? And I think also in terms of user expectations, that it's really interesting to think about like when it's not there, people look for it. But like, so ways of sort of visualizing or communicating absence instead of only, moving forward on the premise of, trying to fill in all the gaps. Does that make sense? Does that?
Yeah, it's like the tool that you shared around the confidence, I thought was in a way of showing absence in a way, the kind of lack of confidence in the identification, I guess it was, right? So yeah, great comment. I think question over here, yeah.
Thank you. I'm not exactly sure what my question is, so bear with me. I hope that all of you can comment on the hierarchy of words versus images in cataloging, in archiving, in AI, because you're all dealing with images. All of these images, everybody is trying to describe them in a lot of words, in very complicated words and hierarchy of words. And obviously there are real limitations that we're always discovering about that. But because the communication, I'm a documentarian, I can appreciate of images, and so I appreciate the image in and of itself, but I also very much value caption information that gives me context and background and et cetera, et cetera. So I think that's extremely important. But the word people very often govern and how images are used, how they are interpreted, how they are created in, how they work in AI or in daily life. And so I'm just wondering how you deal with that built-in problem of hierarchy between words and images.
I jump in just because somehow we didn't incorporate any words, which was easier. So yeah, one of the problems when you try to find so many images or when you try to organize your content is, should we, and we tested indeed, should we use some kind of AI to describe, to give a caption? And the end we decide not to follow this, but just provide an interface to find things that are similar to each other. So if you want to find something that is visual, let's start from the visual itself, and then let's move from there. And try to refine through visuality what we want. So if we want a specific pose, we put a picture with that pose, and we try to see what's there. And so we completely, in any way, cheat, because we avoided the problem on that side. But somehow that also gives us a new perspective of how to search things. And I think that's a clearly added value, specifically for images, because you are not forced to translate from one method of expression to another, but you can just say, okay, I want something more or less like this. Then let me add, I want also try to find something else. And you continue to add image over image in order to find some kind of crossing and then define your own visuality that then you can choose to work with. That's the method that we employed, but we also know that a museum cannot really do that. It's more complicated because the words are not just word to describe, a word to find the images. And a lot of people work with text. And we are not going to get out of that. You are not going to be able in a very public interface to say, just give me an image and that is fine.
Yes, I just think it would be nice if the word people were a little bit more humble about the limitations of what they can interpret in images and to introduce that into the whole ethos of cataloging, et cetera.
Yeah.
But how do you counter that? I see you did it mostly in your project, but it's endemic, of course.
Yeah, I think the concept of the hierarchy is to describe something in its least detailed version, right? It's like if you don't have the information, you use the largest term that is the next best option, is kind of the model of the language hierarchy. And And in most cases, from a cataloging perspective, something is always better than nothing, but usually that something is very generic and not very helpful.
Well, it's also about search, right? Because it's through language that search happens, but that, as we're seeing, is shifting right now. So it might be possible to have, as you were showing, searchability through the image that's embedded within cataloging systems or CMS systems, et cetera. But I don't think it's there yet. But I'm curious whether or not there is the capacity to do image search embedded within these content management system, like, I don't know, the museum system or so, some of the ones that are more sophisticated that and more expensive that nobody can afford, except for maybe the ROM. Oops.
I think maybe not in CMS systems, but digital asset management systems or applications that funnel through APIs is more likely the route. Like a collections management system is really a place where the data is stored and funneled to multiple different places. So we find that having those external accesses, like through APIs, is really what's going to probably move things forward or provide access in different ways. And we probably see that a lot in the projects that you've worked on.
Yeah, I think we're moving toward a image. Right now we're on image, text to image, image to text.
Yeah.
But image to image is coming at the next level of multimodal models. We have image embeddings, we have clip, we have those models where you say, which is primarily a game of image similarity. So I want to find more dogs, I want to find more faces, I want to find more. That's what we've seen most search or by color. So Cooper Hewitt, Smithsonian, did a really cool job early on with some color analysis projects that said, search our collection by red, search our collection by blue. It's a design museum, which makes a lot of sense for them. So I think our frontier models can't do image yet. And I think that's what's coming next in this large language model. But I want to give a shout out to, again, to Francis's talk tomorrow, because I think this is also a history of technology. In the first digital image, it's from Russell Kirch, which comes, what year is Francis in here right now? Yeah. When's your first digital image?
Well, that's debatable. But
Okay, yeah.
But he's credited with scanning the first photograph in 1957.
Okay, so and computers were optimized for basically text over pixel, and pixels so it's partially what we've inherited is a history of technology as well that we're going to have to engage with, because the pixel as the unit of the image has been computationally later than the byte technology, the bit technology behind text. So we've also inherited an entire history of computing. Shout out tomorrow. Yeah, sorry not to put you on the spot. Sorry about that.
We have time for a few more questions, and Thierry?
Yeah, I want to go back to the materiality of the images. I'm sorry about that, but I cannot help. And I want to do that from an historian perspective, and because I really think that over the last decades, really we put the materiality of the images in order to understand these images, to anchor these images in a context, in a meaningful context, and context that changed, even though some images didn't change. And I cannot not be surprised by the fact that I find that the materiality of these photographs, is not considered as much as I would like them to be. And I'm wondering first why, and second, what could we do about that? I.e., could we? Maybe I'm trying to put into words, my next research project and shirk application, but could we envision an AI tool that would help us, to describe, the materiality of these images? And is that possible? Is it possible to train AI in order to recognize some physical aspect of these photographs. See, I'm really leaving the subject, aside, maybe for the tyranny of the object, but I think still that, it's something important that I would love to hear you talk about.
Maybe I can. It's entirely possible to train data, to train models to try and recognize basic techniques. There are moments when it becomes difficult in the late 19th century for everybody, right? Even if you're a specialist, it's very hard to distinguish between some technologies. I think I thought about this when we saw the turning table, and the images were not 2D objects. They are 3D objects that are folding. And one of the problems with I think the way we digitize and we think about digitization is looking at photos in particular, sort of pure 2D images. In the 19th century, they are absolutely not that. So Dhruva is going to talk about another project of ours, trying to create comfortable, immersive 3D from stereoscopic views from the 19th century. But nothing looks like an image, a glass plate, transparent glass plate in stereoscopy, looked at through a 1960s stereoscope. So you can digitize all you want. There's a wonder to the quality of that image. Look, it's great. It's just, so I know it's not romanticization. It's really the experience of vision. It's not just about the materiality of the image. It's how you look at stuff. And so that's something that, yeah, it's very hard to, so the basic technological materiality techniques recognition, that's something that is entirely feasible. Maybe we should think about having a sample in 3D for each collection that people can mess with on their screens or something like this to at least have a sense of a soft 3D surrogate of what one of the images looks like, right? Yeah.
I mean, I think this is possible and very exciting about being able to actually do the physical aspects. Tomorrow I'll talk a little bit about some color shifting. We actually did automated color shifting to bring color back to its original Kodachrome. But we've also done some experiments where we took the FSA, so 1930s photography. Roy Stryker was known for punching holes in negatives. We built a classifier to go get all the punched holes images, all like 1,500 of them, and built a little lab that's like, here's the punched holes. Now, a book came out later about that, and I was like, they should have emailed us. We had them all for them. They manually went through trying to find them. So that we had this material element of it. The other thing that I did this with film, like 8 and 16 millimeter, not with still image film. We took overscans, and we're working on a classifier to identify who made the film based on the comments written on the sprocket sides. Like, was it AFCA, was it Kodak? So I think there's moments to really do some training on the color, if it's an overscan, and even the brackets that you can play. Sometimes there's slight shifts in the brackets that could be playful ways of doing it. So I think that's a really exciting moment for that kind of classification that we've been playing with a bit. But I've mostly done it with time-based media, not still.
It sounds to me like there's still opportunities for research here, Terry, just saying. We've got time for a few more questions if folks have them. But maybe we're at that point of the afternoon. That's also possible. I'm just stalling here a little bit to see if we have any last bids going up with the hands, but I don't see any. So let me ask you to join me in thanking our fabulous panelists today.
Thank you very much to all of you, Chantal, Danielle, Elspeth, Lauren, and Nicola for this conversation this afternoon. I think, the goal of that conversation was to bring indeed, the academia and in discussion with the museums, and around this question of AI tool that could be used to organize and navigate and use photograph. I still think that we have a lot to work on, and I'm glad we started that conversation today. So thank you to all of you.